So let's take a look at the history of misinformation. Just to show you that this is by no means a novel problem. This has been around for thousands and thousands of years, perhaps as long as human history, right? So a new technology emerges that allows people to spread information to massive groups of people faster than ever before. While it's used to promote new ways of thinking and believing, it's also helping to incite fear, anger, uh, and it's being used to amplify certain causes. Does this sound familiar? It sounds like a description of social media, of the internet. This is actually a description of the printing press. So it can easily apply to a movement 500 years ago that changed the course of history in Europe and around the world. That's the Reformation. So that was back when the Catholic Church was kind of in hot water. They were doing a lot of really bad things in society. At the time, right, they were essentially not just the church, they were also the rulers, the government. And so this triggered kind of a rebellious group, someone who wanted to change things, right, to reform things. That was Martin Luther, if you remember some of your European history. So essentially, Martin Luther said, hey, we're going to break away from the Catholic Church and form our own religions. Well, of course, the Catholic Church was not happy about that. So here's an example of some Catholic Church misinformation. It might be hard to see, right? Obviously, this text, this pamphlet is very old, but it's essentially depicting Martin Luther here at the bottom as the root of all evil. That he was the origin of all these heresies or heretical branches of religion, of Christianity, right? Of course, now we acknowledge these Christian branches as legitimate, right? They're not like new. There's so many these days as well, right? So this is actually when it all started. The Catholic Church, of course, said, "Hey, you're going against God. You're breaking the religion." But why is this misinformation? It's because Martin Luther only started one branch. A lot of these branches started independently. They were totally different than his. So that's one example of misinformation in this pamphlet. So instead of a tweet, right, they would actually distribute books, pamphlets through the use of the printing press. Printing press was actually the first example of a mass media technology. Before, right, you had to write things by hand. Now you had a machine that could print thousands, if not millions, of copies of something that you wanted to share, right, of information you wanted to share. Um, as well, right, this also implies that, so like I said, it implies that Protestant movements all came from Luther. We know that's not true. It also implies through some of the texts that Martin Luther is behind all these violent rebellions that were going on. When the truth is, again, a lot of these rebellions against the church were happening independently from Luther. Um, the truth is, the church had angered so many people, had done so many bad things that society was kind of rebelling and throwing a revolution against the church. So yeah, the misinformation falsely suggests that all Protestant reformers were connected and that they were all violent, right? In the case of Luther, you could argue that he wasn't actually as violent, right, as some of these other revolutionaries. So yeah, very early example of misinformation. It goes almost as far back, right, as the history of mass media itself. So let's go ahead and continue. So before Putin waged Operation Lakta, uh, that was a sophisticated hacking and disinformation campaign during the 2016 US presidential election. If you don't know about this operation, let's watch a quick clip on it.
Defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare against the United States, with the stated goal of spreading distrust towards the candidates and the political system in general.
The indictment accuses the Russians, who worked out of this building in Moscow, of stealing American identities, setting up fake accounts on Facebook and other social media sites, and spreading false and inflammatory information. According to the indictment, their work isn't limited to the internet. Russians allegedly traveled across the U.S., hid their identities, and staged political rallies. The indictment also confirms the Russians had a favored candidate. Quote, by early to mid-2016, defendants' operations included supporting the presidential campaign of then-candidate Donald J. Trump and disparaging Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, so this was actually a Russian uh, not misinformation, but disinformation campaign. Remember, disinformation is intentional. Misinformation is just the broader term that the information is not true. So the Russians actually staged a very sophisticated disinformation campaign here in the U.S., specifically to affect the outcome of the U.S. presidential election. They went as far as trying to hack actually some of our election technology. They were not successful, right, in actually making an impact on votes, on actual votes, but they certainly tried. But they were way more successful in their spreading of misinformation. So they were actually able to deploy bots, actually to put boots on the ground, right? People here to polarize the public, right? To have people choose sides and move further and further to the fringes. Um, while some can argue, right, that people were already being polarized through American politics on their own, uh, this Russian interference in the election certainly made the issue a lot worse. So before this example, right, this is relatively new, right, 2016, at the time of recording this video, less than 10 years ago. There's actually a historical counterpart to this. So it turns out in the 1980s, the KGB, also the Russians, formerly the Soviet Union, right, orchestrated another disinformation campaign to spread the false narrative that the U.S. had created the HIV/AIDS epidemic, that they created as a biological weapon in Maryland. So it turns out this is not new, right? The Russians staging disinformation against the West. Let's go ahead and watch this video for more details on it.
Okay, so to start, let's go back to July 1983 and all the way over here, New Delhi, India. This is when a remarkable story appears in a newspaper called The Patriot. It claims the HIV virus was secretly created by US government scientists as a weapon to kill African Americans and gay people. It even names a facility, Fort Detrick in Maryland, where the virus was supposed to have been concocted. It's a crazy allegation printed in a small newspaper. No big deal, right? But fast forward just a couple of years and look what's happening. The story is spreading all over Africa. A scientific report's even published by two East German biologists who say they can prove AIDS is made in the USA. All these articles are from just a few months at the end of 1986. And then somehow, it ends up here.
A Soviet military publication claims the virus that causes AIDS leaked from a U.S. Army laboratory conducting experiments in biological warfare.
That's Dan Rather reading a fake news story to millions of unwitting Americans on national TV.
Yeah, so they actually planted an article in an Indian newspaper of all places. The Soviets successfully were able to get that small piece of misinformation to spread all around the world. It actually led directly to hundreds of thousands of deaths because people were denying the dangers of the HIV/AIDS crisis altogether. Um, and of course, the main goal was to undermine U.S. credibility, foster anti American sentiment across the world, and create tensions between the U.S. and its allies, specifically Africa and Asia. So, another successful example of Russian disinformation, a very sophisticated campaign. Uh, another great example of disinformation, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, we have to admit that Trump represents a cult of personality. And with these cults of personality, well, first I should define it. So it's a term used to describe when a leader, often in politics, is portrayed as an almost godlike, heroic figure through constant praise, propaganda, and media control. So we already know Elon Musk, right, controls Twitter, the X platform as it's known now. And of course, Trump, through the White House social media pages, for example, posts very frequently very flamboyant imaging of the presidency, of himself, and in fact, right, this long live the king. which is antithetical, right, to the founding fathers' conception of the presidency, right? The reason the U.S. was started was because we didn't like the dictatorship, right? The ruling of a king, specifically the British Empire over the United States. So Trump represents a cult of personality, and to get people right to see you as a heroic figure, right, as perfect, right, as a king, to get people's respect in a way, right, people's admiration, that often involves kind of twisting the truth, repainting history, as we see, right, with these efforts to purge diversity, right, from schools, from education, from texts, from libraries, and so forth. So yeah, Trump's cult of personality is just a modern example of the Cold War and World War II cult of personalities. So we have fascist leaders, for example, Stalin's Agitprop, which is short for agitation and propaganda, was a department in his Communist Party responsible for rewriting history and again presenting Stalin as this grandiose leader. As you can see in this imagery, very similar, right, feel to some of the imagery that Trump had shared through the White House and executive mediums of communication. Another example is Mussolini's Minkopop, another fascist leader who relied on a cult of personality. So Minkopop, or Ministry of Popular Culture, was responsible for creating the cult of the Duce. So Duce is the Italian word for leader. And as you can see, another example of very flamboyant imagery, trying to get people to see their leader, right, as godlike, as infallible, right, that they can do no wrong. Of course, right, if you're human, right, we all know humans make mistakes, they get things wrong. Uh, they they say things, right, that they may not necessarily mean, or they make mistakes, right. They'll promise, especially, right, in U.S. presidencies, politics. We notice that there's a element of promising a certain level of things, right, and delivering another, and that goes for all presidencies. But yeah, in order to get people to see you as this like all powerful, um, unwavering leader, the cult of personality does rely on an element of misinformation.